All right. I'm not sure where you're headed with any of these questions. We haven't really talked about this, so I'm excited to.
We never do.
I know. No, sometimes you and I have a conversation.
Yeah, every once in a while.
And I'll say, hey, I may not be able to get to this. So, like watching film of the Jacksonville Jag defense. I was going
to, in fact, lead you there to open things up. Look at us on the same page out of the gate here. So you've watched the film on the Jacksonville Jaguars and specifically their defense. What do you see?
I see a group that does have talent, as you heard Jeff Joniak mention, on the edge with Walker and Hines Allen. The interior of their defensive line is nothing special. Their linebacking core was not impressed by, and their secondary is really bad. If you look at the numbers, I think they give up 288 passing yards per game. Jeff keeps saying that they've had one interception. I don't see that. All I see on the stat sheets is that they have 0 interceptions on the year. Regardless of it's 0 or 1, they're very gettable in the back half. And despite having 2 good pass rushers on the edge, their pass rush in general is very average. I think they have like 11 sacks on the season. So they're really not really pressuring quarterbacks on a consistent basis. The funny thing, the thing that had me most kind of perplexed, and it's a good thing because it's pro Bears, is they play, and you and I had this conversation about the percentage of man coverage that they play. I don't think there's another team, is there, that plays more man coverage on a percentage basis? Maybe one.
I think after last week it dipped down to now they're number 3 in man. But
okay, so your third point, there's only 2 teams in the league that play more man coverage. They suck at man coverage. Like they're in press man a lot, and you watch the Indianapolis film, and Colts receivers are just getting away from them, like in a very easy fashion. So was not impressed with him. I will say this: I don't think they're as bad as the Carolina Panthers, but they're not good, especially in the back half. And if the Bears can have the same type of success protecting Caleb and giving him time, I think this is another opportunity for him to have a big day, meaning throwing for over 300 yards and them scoring a bunch of points. If you flip it over, I got to tell you, I was impressed with what they did offensively. Now, they were playing against a Colts defense that isn't great, but Trevor Lawrence, to me, is one of the bigger conundrums in the National Football League. I was a huge fan of his coming out. I think that he's got a lot of talent, but he's never played as well consistently as I thought he would. And we all know that he's turned it over. He's turned it over 62 times, which I think is more than any other player in the league since he came into the league in 2021. But you're going to get Evan Ingram back, very talented pass-catching tight end. I like Christian Kirk, nice slot guy. Brian Thomas Jr. is a fantastic rookie wide receiver. Tank Bigsby is getting the majority. I think he got more carries, didn't he, Meller, last week than ETN, but he certainly had more success.
I don't know if he had more carries, but he ended up, ETN had the shoulder injury. He missed the last 2 drives, and Bigsby obviously went for 125 yards from scrimmage. So he was obviously, he's been kind of his backfield the last couple weeks.
And that this Jags offense, they average almost 6 yards per carry on the ground. So they can run the football, and it just happens that is, if the Bears defense has a quote-unquote Achilles heel, it has been trying to stop the run. They're giving up over 120 yards and 4.5 yards per carry on the ground. So I think it's an offense as long as Trevor Lawrence takes care of the football, something he hasn't done consistently in his career. I think that they will score some points, especially with Tyreek Stevenson out and Jaquan Brisker out. I just think their defense at this point, they got to score 40 to win. Like last week against the Colts, they had to score 37 because the Colts scored 34. So I think it's a game. I'm picking the Bears to win this game. I think it'll be a little closer, certainly, than what we saw last week. But I think the Jags are playing a little bit better on offense, and defensively, they stink.
Real quick, Tyler, since he mentioned his name, can we talk about Josh Allen, a.k.a. Josh Hines Allen?
Yes.
And the tough blow to be playing the same sport of one of the most famous athletes, playing the same sport, that forces him after 17 and a half sacks last season. I truly believe he changed his name to Hines Allen just so that he didn't constantly have to answer the question about Josh Allen from Buffalo, the Bills quarterback, being the other Josh Allen, the more famous Josh Allen.
It's interesting. Like he had, like they said, 17 and a half sacks last year, You wouldn't think, but
seriously, everywhere he goes,
quarterbacks are always going to get more attention than pass rushers.
I mean, think about it too. He was drafted 7th overall in the 2019 draft. In the previous draft in 2018, Josh Allen, the quarterback, was drafted 7th overall. He can't even have his own draft slot.
The one thing that I would say as well before we kind of wrap up this question or the answer to this question, and I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, as bad as their pass defense is, and as good as their run defense is, because they are, and I know I heard Abdallah talk about their DVOA with regard to stopping the run and everything. Shane Waldron has to stay committed to running the football. You cannot be romanticized into throwing it 50 times because the secondary is so bad. Despite what you're facing, and even if you're not running it with a great deal of success, you have to stay committed. If you go back and look at the Carolina game last week, they ran it, 38 times? They only averaged 3.3 yards per carry, but they stayed committed to running the football. And I think it opened things up in the passing game. And my hope is that they've learned their lesson and they will stay committed to running the ball, even if they're not making, great progress with it.
Well, to your point too, with the yards per carry there, I would wonder what the success rate was, because you had 3 1-yard touchdowns. 1 yard, you get 1 yard on those plays.
And by the way, you also
rate is good.
Yeah, you also had like 3 kneel downs, I think, from Tyson Bagent at the end as well.
True.
So let's say 3.5 yards or 3.6 yards or whatever it was. It wasn't a ton. Like they weren't ripping huge runs against Carolina, but you still have to maintain your commitment to it. I think they've averaged 33 runs per game over the last 2 weeks, which has been great. So,
all right, I know Shane Waldron was not your football devil after the first couple of weeks, like he was with most of the city. However, there's certainly been offensive improvement over the last couple of weeks. Yes. Where are you at with Shane Waldron right now?
I think he's fine. I don't know where it's going to go. What I'm impressed with is the fact that he has made the necessary adjustments. What I said early on was you're going to have to be patient, because there's a lot of new inside this huddle. The quarterback's new, the receivers are new for the most part, and the play caller's new. So you've got to understand what each guy brings to the table. You have to become, familiar with what guys do well and what they don't do well. And I think that, people, we live in this immediate, we want everything to be done immediately. And maybe it took him a little longer to make some of the adjustments than we all would have liked. But I think that the adjustments that he made were necessary. And I think that he was finally encouraged to make them after the Indianapolis game. And I've given you guys this explanation before. If you look at game 1, you knew you had a difficult challenge against the Titans front 7. But there were plays to be made. I don't think that was a problem with play calling. I thought player execution was their biggest issue and the reason why they didn't do much on offense. Second game, nobody thought that they were going to be able to accomplish much. You go to Houston, you're playing a Texans team that's outstanding with 2 great pass rushers and a really dynamic defensive-minded head coach. So you say to yourself, well, it hasn't worked, but we're not going to deviate from what our plan is. You go to Indianapolis against a team that was giving up 237 rushing yards per game and wasn't very good, and nothing worked. I think that's where they had their come to Jesus football meeting. And I think that's where they actually decided to make some adjustments and make some changes. And again, we can talk about whether or not it happened too late, but I do think that there have been noticeable changes and noticeable adjustments. And I thought last weekend was his best game, which isn't, a hard, it's not a hard conclusion.
But if you were to grade it on a curve, given who the defense was there, how would you grade out what Waldron did? I thought
it was an A game plan. I really do. I thought that they game planned correctly. I thought that they put together something that they felt comfortable with. I'll give you another example. In their first drive, it was a nightmare. You come out and Caleb almost throws a pick 6. On the third play, on third down, Braxton Jones or maybe it was Darnell Wright gets blown back into the quarterback, and he's got Roma Dunze on a shallow cross, doesn't throw it. So you've got another one of these boom goes the dynamite drives that leaves you thinking, oh no, are we going to do this again? They came back in the second drive and they dedicated themselves to running the football. They were patient. They stayed with the run, and ultimately they took the ball down the field. And the first touch, and I believe, was the deep crosser to DJ, 6 or 7 plays in. So I thought that was a good example of the offensive coordinator finding a way to calm his young quarterback down, to take control of the offense. And actually, I thought was a very good decision on his behalf. So I would give him a good solid A for that game plan. Look, you have to be more creative, and the game plan has to be better when the defensive challenge escalates. And they catch a break again this week because, as I said, the Jags will be the 4th consecutive bottom 5 defense that this offense will face. So you got to make hay.
All right, what is the next step of progress for Caleb Williams this week? Coming off of a week where he threw for over 300 yards, had a couple of touchdowns in the air, looked good running the football as well. What's the next step for him this week, albeit against a bad Jaguars defense?
I would say try to repeat what you did last week. So when you go back to what they did against the Rams 2 weeks ago, he played a really clean game. 0 turnovers. Did not push the ball down the field. It was kind of a limited approach, but he had a really clean game, and I thought he played smart. Last week, he played a really clean game because he made good decisions. There were no turnovers, and they added that vertical element to what they were doing in the passing game, and it looked beautiful in so many ways. I think he threw for over 300 yards and averaged over 10 yards per attempt. I think you've seen progress there in the last 2 weeks. He's completing 71% of his passes. He hasn't thrown a pick. He hasn't turned the ball over in each of the last 2 weeks. So you've seen that progress. I don't know, like, if he throws for more yards and more touchdowns, great. I just want to see him do against the Jags what he did against the Colts, which is take care of the football, make good decisions, play clean, and also press it downfield when it is necessary. So I don't think that you really ask him to do anything significantly more than what we saw. Repeat that performance. I think that's what would impress me, because the challenge is going to get more difficult as time goes on. The Commanders coming out of the bye, they're not a great defense, but they're better than the crew they've faced the last 3 or 4 weeks. And then you get the Cardinals, who've got some players. They're Jekyll and Hyde. And then after that, you get the Patriots, and they suck, but their defense is good. So I think the defensive challenge is going to increase on a week-to-week basis once they get past the Jags. So I would say now, improvement to me wouldn't necessarily be play better against the Jags than you did against the Rams, but repeat that performance. That's what I would say. Yes.
Start to show that you've got a consistent formula here.
Yes, that's what I would say.
So before Caleb Williams, the last time we talked about a college prospect like Caleb Williams was Trevor Lawrence. And when he was coming out of Clemson, was regarded as this generational type prospect. But so far, while he hasn't been atrocious or a bust per se, he also hasn't lived up to that generational tag. But does anybody get the benefit of the doubt over their college performance more than Trevor Lawrence does?
Probably so. Now, look, you do have to factor in the Urban Meyer experience. That hasn't been pleasant. I'm sure it wasn't pleasant for him. I have to tell you, I am underwhelmed by what I've seen from him since 2021. I thought he was going to be a significantly better, more consistent, good player, and we haven't seen that. As we've talked about, he committed 62 turnovers since 2021, which is more than anyone else in the league. But yeah, I think that he got the $275 million contract, and I do believe people overlooked a lot of, they do consistently overlook a lot of his poor performances. I've said to you, I've been unimpressed. I was unimpressed with what he did last year. I think if you go back 2 years, you can look at the season he had and be pretty impressed with that. But overall, the quality of his play is not matched where he was drafted, nor the way he's been compensated.
Yeah, and speaking of the contract there, like if you were Jags ownership and management, like what do you do? Because he clearly isn't playing like this top 5 and even really top 10 quarterback that you drafted him, and definitely thought he'd be a top 10 guy at this point.
I don't think there's anything you can do. You got to ride it out. I mean, you've surrounded him with a lot of talent. The kid they drafted out of LSU is a really good football player. Christian Kirk is a good football player. Your running game is helpful. Like I said, they're averaging almost 6 yards per carry. They're running the ball effectively. Ingram comes back. Their offensive line isn't dominant, but they have more good moments than bad moments. I don't know that there's anything. You've added Doug Peterson a couple of years ago to come in and help bring him along. I'm not sure there's a whole lot you can do. Like, what can you do?
Yeah, it feels like if you invest in a quarterback and give them that long-term contract, that big money deal,
that you're not going to be able to get out of.
Not really. I mean, because outside of Deshaun Watson and the Browns, there's not too many, teams that are probably looking at their quarterback and wondering if it was a sound investment. Most of the time when you make that, when you say, okay, we're going to make this guy our franchise QB, like Justin Herbert in, Los Angeles for the Chargers, maybe Jalen Hurts. Maybe Jalen Hurts and the Eagles are unsure about, but it's hard to get out of once you've invested.
I think the only thing you can do, I don't think you can change the quarterback. You would have to ultimately decide that Doug Peterson wasn't the right guy to bring him along. And that ultimately may be the change that is made. But you're not going to move away from Trevor Lawrence, I wouldn't think.
All right, another quarterback that was in the news this week, Aaron Rodgers, because a lot of people are accusing him of being the reason that Robert Saleh was fired by the Jets. This was Aaron Rodgers on Pat McAfee earlier this week about those accusations.
As far as any of the ridiculous allegations out there, I'm not going to spend more than one sentence in response to it, and that is that I resent any of those accusations because they're patently false. And it's interesting the amount of power that people think that I have, which I don't. But I love Robert, and it was, one of those days yesterday.
A lot of the reporting around the Jets has backed up what Rodgers has said, but do you buy it?
I do to a certain degree. Look, it is odd. A lot of what has transpired is really odd because when they decided to move on from Saleh, you would think that Nathaniel Hackett's voice in the room would be a little bit louder. Not only did he not get the interim head coaching spot, he was demoted from offensive coordinator. Now you got somebody different actually calling
Todd
plays.
Downing will be calling plays.
Yeah, I mean, the defense was fine. I mean, you probably know the DVOA stats better than I, but I think the Jets' defense has been fine all along. It's offensively, Rodgers hasn't played well. And there's no reason for them to be throwing 55 passes in a game that is a one-score or a 10-point game, especially when you have talented running backs as well. So I think their approach has been flawed. I don't know about Robert Saleh as a head coach. I think as a defensive coordinator, he's very talented. But what's his winning percentage? I hear Carm talk about it all the time. It's like 37 or 40%. So, look, you can't tell me, though, that Aaron Rodgers' voice inside the building isn't the loudest voice. There's no question it is.
For sure, yeah.
But, I mean, I got to take him at his word that he didn't get Robert Saleh fired. That one, as the story kind of unfolded, you heard that it almost felt like Woody Johnson was looking for an opportunity to get rid of him.
Yeah, remember, he did not hire Robert Saleh.
It was his son, right?
Yeah, was it son or younger brother?
Was it his younger brother? It was
whoever was, while he was being the ambassador in England.
UK.
Yes, to the UK, thank you. That's when the decision to hire Saleh was made. So he really wasn't his guy when he came back.
Right.
Crazily enough, though, if the Jets win on Monday Night Football, they will be in first place in the AFC East because they're playing the Bills.
Look, I still think that Aaron Rodgers can play. It hasn't been on display yet. He played horrible against the Vikings in London, but I don't think he's done yet. I don't know what they're trying to accomplish offensively. I think they need to rely more on their running game. Their offensive line isn't great, but I think that they've asked Aaron Rodgers to do too much too soon. So we'll see if a new play caller actually will have a better rhythm with him. But anything else?
That's all I got. By the way, this portion of Waddle and Silvy brought to you by Steinhoff.
Very nice. When we come back, before we get out of here, we'll tell you what to watch for. I have a show for you. It's probably a repeat, but it's one that I have enjoyed, and I will let you know what it is when we come back.